Please, I just need a job. No one wanted to hire this poor alien widow mother, except one human. 3 days. That's how long it had been since anyone knocked on Shaw's door. And even then, it had just been a junk runner with half-melted optics and a fistful of bad credits. But on the 4th day, when the storm rolled in from the sector vents, something different came with the rain. A knock. Quiet, hesitant, a whisper of desperation masked as 3 soft taps on metal. Shaw didn't move at first. He stayed crouched over his workbench, shoulders hunched inside a thermal coat that still carried the sour sting of solder. Sparks snapped from his pen as he eased a counterfeit biometric strip into the curved shell of a retinal scanner. He didn't look up. He was used to the knocking. Desperate people roamed Lower Chrysium like ghosts. But something about the rhythm made him pause. 3 slow knocks, then silence. Not a courier code, not corporate. Something human. He exhaled, set down the solder pen, and crossed the room. The airlock hatch was cold under his palm, vibrating faintly from the wind funneled down the alleys outside. The external camera feed shimmered with static, but the shape was unmistakable. A woman, alone, cloaked, small frame, unmoving. Shaw hesitated, then opened the door. She flinched at the sudden hiss of depressurization, clutching her cloak tighter around what looked like a bundle in her arms. Her skin, what little showed through the dripping folds, was a soft blue-gray, like dusk over ice. Not human. Sylvani, maybe. One of the outer colony species. Shaw had seen dozens collapse in these alleys. Starved, displaced, discarded by the system. But this one, she didn't beg, not at first. Her voice came like thread through storm. Please, I just need a job. The words sat in the air between them, too fragile for the weather. Shaw didn't answer. He scanned her quickly. Torn cloak, white hair soaked to the scalp, bare feet wrapped in stitched market wrap. Nothing that screamed threat, but something about her eyes, downcast, never quite meeting his, spoke of survival. The quiet kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that outlasted pity. She stepped forward, but only slightly, just enough for the edge of her cloak to shift. That's when he saw it, the child, bundled tight against her chest, swaddled in thermal scraps that weren't holding warmth. Tiny limbs, too still, blue skin, white wisps of hair. Shaw couldn't tell if the child was asleep or unconscious, only that she wasn't crying. Just listening, watching. No one will hire me, the woman continued. Her voice cracked, but not from pleading, from use, like she hadn't spoken out loud in days. Not without papers. I'll clean, scrub, carry things. Just let me work, please. Shaw's hand tightened on the hatch frame. Part of him wanted to close the door, to shut out whatever pain she carried before it bled into his floor. He'd done it before, he'd learned. But another part, the part he tried to kill every day with silence and work, spoke before he could stop it. You know what I do? The woman hesitated, then nodded once. You forge names, she said. Her accent was soft, precise, careful. Could you give me one? Shaw's jaw clenched. Most people whispered that word name like a code, a bribe, a transaction. But she'd said it like a hope, like it meant something sacred. He stepped back. Inside now. She didn't argue, just followed, hunched and slow. As the hatch shut behind her, the warmth of the underground shop hit her like a wall, foul with solder and rust, but still warmer than the rain. She blinked into the dim light, adjusting. The child in her arms stirred barely. Sit, Shaw said, pointing to the padded bench against the wall. She obeyed. He watched her unstrap the baby, gently, reverently, and tuck her close, breathing warmth into the child's cheeks. Blue skin against blue skin. The little one's eyes fluttered open, silver gray, too large for her face, catching the light like metal. For a second they locked with Shaw's, and something hummed, barely perceptible. But his old retina scanner, deactivated for months, clicked faintly behind him. He turned, heart jumping. Nothing. He looked back. The child blinked slowly. No fear, no noise, just awareness. What's her name? He asked without thinking. The woman didn't answer right away. Then quietly, she doesn't have one yet. Shaw stared. In a city like this, names weren't given. They were bought, assigned, stamped onto flesh and file. A child without one was invisible. No name, no clearance, no oxygen credit, no food right, no legal memory. He reached beneath his workbench and pulled out a rusted toolbox, shoved aside a stack of null cards and pulled out a basic cleaning rig, a brush, a filter wrench, a cracked respirator. He set them on the floor between them. "You want work?" he said flatly. "Scrub the vent grates. Start under the intake ducts. 1 section a day. You miss one, don't come back." She nodded. He looked at the child again. She hadn't looked away. Shaw turned, pretending to check the filter box, and grabbed a smaller breather, one meant for juvenile bots. He tested the seals, then handed it over without a word. The woman took it with both hands. Her fingers were trembling now, whether from cold or relief. He couldn't tell. "What do you feed her?" he asked. "Whatever I can find. Mostly heat packs, sometimes synth paste." He crossed to the tiny reheat station in the corner, ladled out a bowl of broth, nothing rich, just basic rations with protein sludge and salt, and set it on the floor halfway between them, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to insult. The woman didn't move. She only watched him. Shaw turned back to his workbench. Seconds passed, then a soft shuffle. Cloth rustled against stone, a faint bump. He glanced down. The child had crawled forward on her own, blanket dragging behind her. She sat at his feet now, staring up at him, unblinking, as if measuring something inside him he didn't even know he'd left unguarded. Shaw crouched, pulled a nutrient biscuit from the bench and held it out. "Not scared, huh?" The girl didn't flinch, just watched. He placed the biscuit gently in her small hand. She blinked, then held it back up to him, offering, not begging, sharing. Shaw swallowed hard. "Keep it," he murmured, standing quickly. Behind him, the woman finally whispered something, low, in a language he didn't know. A lullaby, maybe, or a prayer. The girl crawled back to her mother, curling into the folds of her cloak, eyes still locked on his back. And for the first time in years, Shaw felt something he couldn't name. Not quite guilt, not quite hope, just something. He reached for his solder pen, tried to focus, but his hands shook slightly. He didn't ask her name again, didn't need to. Something told him he'd learn it soon enough. The vents were darker than she expected, narrow, stale, and lined with filth that clung like old smoke. The first time she slid inside, Elu strapped to her back and breathing through the modified child mask Shaw had given her. The metal grated against her knees and palms. The grime under her nails felt permanent after just 10 minutes. But she didn't stop. She needed this job. The alternative was the alleys again, exposure, hunger, scans, the risk of someone recognizing her, of someone remembering where she used to belong. Here, in this buried workshop reeking of scorched metal and cold ration broth, she was invisible. And she was working. That meant something. The girl didn't cry. Even when the vents echoed with distant hums and the sharp clink of falling rust, she didn't make a sound, just clung tightly, small hands grasping her mother's shoulder straps. Her weight was nothing, but her presence was a tether, an anchor, the reason for every scraped knuckle and swallowed complaint. The morning had started in silence. Shaw handed her a brush and a flashlight without a word. She nodded, took the tools and went to the grate. No questions, no small talk. He wasn't the kind of man who wasted language. The kind she used to know never spoke quietly unless they were preparing to lie. This one was different. She worked steadily for hours, moving along the low ducts with mechanical precision, cleaning mesh after mesh, pushing through stagnant air and brittle fungal crusts. Every now and then, she'd pause to adjust Elu's breather or wipe condensation from the inside of her mask. Back in the main room, Shaw barely glanced at her. He worked at his station with his usual intensity, the blue flicker of his tools casting him in pale light. But he was listening. She could feel it. Every time her hand slipped or the duct creaked, his head twitched slightly like someone trying not to care and failing. It was nearing the second evening when the girl started to cough, a sharp, high-pitched sound, dry, then wet. At first it was brief, then it came again, longer, her tiny chest convulsed with effort. The woman froze in the middle of a crawl space, head bowed low, the metallic dust swirling around her knees. Her hands clenched. She waited, counted 5 slow breaths, then slid backward out of the vent, her arms already moving to check the child's vitals. The cough came again. Elu's face was flushed, her lips tinted with faint gray. She blinked slowly, eyes dazed, and let out a rasping wheeze. Shaw was already standing. "She's burning," he said. The woman didn't speak. She pressed her forehead to Elu's and closed her eyes, as if hoping her own body could absorb the heat. "She's been breathing spores," he continued. "The ducts are filthy. I should have cleared them before. She needs warmth. the woman said. Her voice was rough. And rest. Shaw moved quickly to the supply wall, rummaging through a drawer filled with half-used med strips and expired supplements. He tossed a patch her way, a stim and heat combo. It wasn't meant for children, but it was all he had. Put it on her back. Press hard until it clicks. She obeyed. When the patch sealed with a hiss, Elu twitched once, whimpered, and went limp against her chest. Her breathing eased, though it was still shallow. She needs more than this, the woman whispered. Shaw didn't answer immediately. He crossed to the back of the room, knelt beside the main heating duct, and opened the panel. A minute later, the soft hum of redirected flow filled the room, warmer and steadier. I've rerouted the coil to your corner, he said. It's not much. It's enough, she replied. She didn't thank him, but her eyes briefly met his. It wasn't gratitude in them. It was something older, recognition, of pain, of shared silence. He didn't like how much it stirred in him. That night, she didn't work. Shaw didn't ask her to. She sat beside the girl, who was sleeping fitfully beneath the threadbare blanket, and ran her fingers slowly through wisps of white hair, murmuring in a language he didn't recognize. He kept to his bench, tools clinking softly. But he wasn't really focused. She was humming, a low, looping tone, not a melody, more like a modulation. It synced with the faint hum of the workshop's systems. It calmed the child. Calmed Shaw too, though he'd never admit it. Sometime later, when the lamps had dimmed into their nightly low glow and the noise of the world above had faded into the usual drone of a city forgetting its underlayers, he heard tiny footsteps. Software uneven. He looked down from his bench. Elu stood there, a blanket trailing from her shoulders like a fallen wing. Her eyes were half-lidded, cheeks still flushed. In her hands, she held the cracked shell of an old data tag, burnt useless. She looked up at him. Tao? She said. The name was mangled. Her tongue wasn't made for their consonants, but the sound was clear. Shaw blinked. The girl held out the tag. He crouched slowly, took it. Thanks, he murmured. She smiled, just slightly, and leaned her head against his knee. Not for warmth, just contact. Shaw froze, then let his hand rest gently atop her head. She didn't move. A moment later, the woman's voice broke the quiet. She doesn't do that. He looked up. She was watching from the blanket nest, arms around her knees. She doesn't touch anyone. Shaw didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He let his hand rest on the girl's hair a few seconds longer, then stood carefully. The girl didn't cry when he moved away, just picked up a wire scrap from the floor and started tracing circles in the dust. She'll be all right, he said. The woman nodded but didn't answer. You ever going to tell me your name? He asked. She hesitated. Then quietly, it's not safe. He didn't push. That night, as he lay in the corner of his makeshift bunk, staring up at rusted ceiling beams and half-dead vents, he realized he wasn't sure what scared him more, that the child had smiled at him, or that he wanted to protect her for no reason other than that smile. The ducts would still need cleaning tomorrow. But tonight, he rerouted another heat line toward their bedroll without saying a word. Elu's fever broke just before dawn. The air inside the workshop was warmer than usual, humming gently from the redirected heat lines Shaw had patched together the night before. The lights above flickered into their dim morning phase, more a suggestion of daylight than the real thing. But it was enough to cast pale illumination over the girl's face. Her breathing was deeper now. Her color had returned slightly. The rasping had dulled into the faint, wet sound of recovery. The woman lay beside her, half curled on her side, a hand resting protectively over the child's ribs. Her eyes had been open most of the night, but now, for the first time since she had entered Shaw's door, they were closed. Shaw didn't move. He sat in his chair at the edge of the workbench, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the little bundle of blue skin and white hair nestled under threadbare blankets. He hadn't slept, not truly, just drifted, on and off, mind caught in quiet spirals. He didn't know the woman's name, still didn't know where she was from or who she was running from. But the way she held the girl, the way she endured, scraped, obeyed, and never once begged for pity, he knew enough. She was surviving. He'd seen what that kind of quiet endurance did to people, what it took. He pushed to his feet. His knees cracked faintly, drawing a slight flinch from the woman, even in her half-sleep. She didn't open her eyes, but he saw her hand curl reflexively around the child's waist, pulling her a little closer. He turned to the back corner of the room where the water line ran through a rusted sink panel. Cold water filtered from above through 3 layers of repurposed industrial mesh. Not clean, but passable. He filled a small metal bowl, then dropped a cloth inside and waited until it had soaked through. Then, slow and careful, he carried it back across the room. As he crouched near the child, the woman stirred again, this time waking fully. Her eyes flicked open, scanning for danger before settling on Shaw. He held out the bowl. She should be cooled down gradually. Keep her drinking if she wakes up. The woman took the bowl without a word. Her fingers were steady, but her jaw tightened slightly. She dipped the cloth and wrung it out with practiced care, then pressed it gently to the child's neck. Shaw stood again. He hesitated. You didn't sleep, he said quietly. Didn't need to. You do now. She gave him a sharp glance, not quite defensive, but not receptive either. You'll be no use to her if you collapse. He gestured toward the back mat. Rest. I'll watch her. Her lips parted slightly as if to argue, but then closed again. For a moment she sat motionless, eyes scanning him as if weighing a dozen unspoken risks. Then finally she shifted her weight and lay down beside the girl. She didn't take her hand off the child's back, but she let her body rest, let her eyes fall closed. Shaw watched them for a moment longer, then returned to his bench. He worked in silence, soldering a circuit board for a proximity scanner that would never be sold. Not because it didn't work, it did, but because the people who needed it couldn't afford it, and the ones who could didn't want gear made in Lower Chryseum. He was halfway through rewiring the emitter array when a soft shuffle caught his ear. He turned. The girl was sitting up again, Elu. He didn't know why he'd started calling her that. It wasn't a name the woman had given, but it had settled into his mind as if it belonged. Elu, the sound of something small and unbroken. She tottered on unsteady feet toward his bench, dragging the blanket behind her. When she reached him, she didn't speak, just held out a small gear, rusted, bent, like she was giving him a treasure. He took it. Thanks. She blinked, then sat on the floor at his feet, cross-legged, her tiny hand reaching into the wire bin beside the workbench. He let her stay. The woman slept for nearly an hour. When she woke, she bolted upright, eyes darting around the room until they locked on her daughter and froze. Elu was holding a spanner too big for her hands, tapping it gently against her knee in perfect rhythm with the ticking of Shaw's solder timer. The girl looked up at her mother and smiled, then looked back to Shaw. Tao, she said again. This time, the woman's face changed. Not fear, not surprise, something older, something that trembled just beneath the skin. Shaw straightened from his seat. She found the gear bin, he said. Didn't break anything. The woman didn't answer. She stood slowly, then crossed the room and knelt beside her daughter. Elu looked up, reached out, and pressed the spanner into her mother's palm like a peace offering. She took it. Her fingers closed around the cold metal, but her eyes were elsewhere, on Shaw. She remembers sounds, she said softly. Patterns, voices, he nodded. She's sharp. She mimics, but only things she likes. That sat between them for a moment, heavier than it should have been. Then she added almost too quietly to hear, I think you remind her of someone. Shaw didn't know how to answer that. He didn't ask who. Instead, he walked over to the storage panel, retrieved a packet of nutrient paste and tossed it toward her. She needs food, not just heat. The woman caught it one-handed, tore it open, fed it to the girl in small, careful bites. Elu chewed slowly, eyes flicking from her mother to Shaw and back again. She was watching, always watching. Later that day, as the woman scrubbed at a wall grate Shaw hadn't asked her to touch, he watched her from the corner of his eye. Her movements were stiff. Her left arm trembled slightly when she reached too far. He noticed her suppress a cough twice. She hadn't eaten. He opened a ration tin and slid it toward her. No words. She paused, then sat. Ate quickly but not ravenously. Her shoulders dropped slightly afterward, as though tension had been holding her spine straight for hours. Where did you learn to scrub ductwork? He asked, not looking at her. She hesitated. Factory maintenance before the shutdown. Official? Her jaw tensed. Not anymore. He didn't press. She didn't volunteer more. But that was more than she'd said about herself since she arrived. By the time the lights dimmed again and the heat coils ticked back into standby, Elu was asleep in a pile of rags that smelled faintly of machine oil and warmth. The woman sat beside her, still and watchful, Shaw stood by the doorway, arms crossed. You still want that name? He asked. She looked up slowly. Yes, she said, but not for free. He nodded, then turned back toward his bench. Behind him he heard her whisper, not to him but to the child. We're staying. 3 words, nothing more, but they echoed louder than anything else that night. It started with the sound of rain again, soft, rhythmic, tapping against the pipes above their heads like a memory refusing to leave. The workshop was dim, the lamp still in standby mode. Shaw sat on a cracked stool near his bench, sipping from a dented metal cup that had long since lost its polish. The heat inside was stable now, enough to keep the damp off their skin, enough to keep Ilu's breathing regular as she napped against a coiled thermal blanket. Kaylin knelt beside her, gently brushing back strands of white hair from the child's forehead. She's stronger, Shaw said without turning. She's sleeping deeper now. Real sleep. Kaylin nodded, her palm still resting lightly on Ilu's side. She hums in her sleep sometimes, she whispered. When she's calm. She doesn't know the words, just the rhythm. Shaw took a slow sip. Might be how she remembers. The part she can't say yet. Kaylin smiled faintly, but it didn't last. Her face settled back into quiet focus, like a wall rebuilding itself. Shaw leaned back against the bench. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but full of something unspoken. You said once you filed a grievance, he murmured, about your mate. Want to tell me what really happened? She didn't answer at first. Instead, Kaylin shifted to sit cross-legged on the floor, her back pressed to the wall, arms around her knees. She watched the flickering light in the duct grills for a long moment, then closed her eyes. I told them his name was Solon, she began softly, but they said there was no record. I stood there, holding his badge, his tools, everything he wore, and they said he never existed. Shaw didn't interrupt. I met him in Dock Unit 9. He worked re-entry bays, stabilizing loadout frames during atmospheric pressure shifts. It's dangerous. You learn fast or die. He learned, then taught others. Took pride in it. Not many Silvani got assigned to primary zones. He earned it. Her voice shook once, barely. They didn't like that. Her eyes opened slowly, not wet, but colder now. There was a day, storm pressure too high, faulty alert system. A container breached. Solon and 3 others locked it down before it imploded. Saved half the dock. 2 days later, he vanished. No warning, just gone. She swallowed. I found the container logs. I tried to report it. Called in every favor I had. A human dock chief pulled me into his office and told me plainly, "You're not authorized to raise incident reports. You're listed as a dependent." Shaw winced. So they erased you too. They wiped my clearance, flagged my ID for inconsistency, locked my biometric code. One day I had a name. The next I didn't. She looked over at Ilu, still sleeping. I didn't even know I was pregnant until the week after. When I tried to scan into a clinic, the system told me I didn't exist. I had to barter for an old Silvani midwife in the undersectors. Gave her what little I had left. Shaw exhaled through his nose. And Ilu? Kaylin smiled again, just barely. She came out small, quiet, but strong. She clung to me like she already knew she'd have to. Her fingers tensed around her knees. They tested her a few months later. Public health units sweep even the undersectors sometimes. A nurse ran her blood through a cross-index and flagged her neural patterns, said she was irregular, too slow to adapt, not compliant with developmental ranges. That's what they told you? Shaw asked. Kaylin nodded. They recommended observation, enrollment in a developmental lab unit, said it was for her benefit. I saw the scan before they took it back. There were markers in her sequence I didn't recognize. Not Silvani, not human. Shaw stared at the wall, jaw tight. She's a hybrid, he said quietly. More than that, she's undocumented and unclassified. That makes her dangerous to them. There was a long silence. Then Shaw stood, walked to the far wall. He unlocked a metal drawer beneath the intake fan and pulled out a chip shell, smaller than a finger. Do you want her to have a name? He asked. Kaylin looked at him, startled. She does. A legal one, one they can't take. Her throat worked, but no words came. Shaw held up the chip. You've earned it. Kaylin slowly rose to her feet, crossed the room. She didn't take the chip right away, just looked at it. What will it say? Ilu, daughter of Kaylin Varys Kaylin, blinked. You gave me back my family name? You said you wanted to keep it. She took the chip with trembling fingers, stared at it like it might vanish. I haven't seen my name in print in over 3 years, she whispered. And Shaw? She asked suddenly, looking up. He hesitated. What about you? He turned away. I burned my name the day I let a child die because of a quota. Kalen stepped forward, voice soft. You were an ID registrar. Yes. You forged records? He gave a bitter laugh. I didn't at first, I just didn't delete the ones I was supposed to. Then I started altering them, hiding threads, splitting family chains so they couldn't be relocated. Kalen studied him for a long moment. Did you ever get caught? They gave me a choice, erasure or silence. I took both. She looked down at the chip in her hand. But you're still here, helping. Too late for most of them, he said, but maybe not for you. A silence settled again, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of something else, recognition perhaps. A thread of belonging beginning to stitch across the quiet. A faint noise stirred them. Elu shifting in the blankets. She sat up, blinking at the low light. Her small voice broke the stillness. Tao? She said softly, reaching toward Shaw. He crouched beside her. Hey, he said, brushing her hair gently. Kalen watched, still holding the chip. She remembers sound better than faces, she said. Your voice calms her. Shaw nodded but didn't speak. Elu reached out, resting her tiny palm against his chest. Kalen's eyes glistened then, not with tears, but with a kind of fierce, tender relief. She deserves more than what this city tried to make her, she whispered. Shaw looked up. So do you. Kalen stepped forward. We stay together, she said, until the end. He rose to meet her eyes. No, he said, until the beginning. And in that moment, beneath rusted beams and flickering light, two people once erased stood still. No longer ghosts, but present. And a child once deemed unworthy of a name had both. The days that followed unfolded like breath returning after drowning. No alarms, no pounding at the door, just the low whir of ventilation and the faint shuffle of small feet on concrete. A rhythm formed in that silence, fragile, almost sacred. They didn't speak of it, but it shaped the air. Kalen moved through the space with a quiet steadiness. She still cleaned the ducts, sorted cables, and cataloged fragments of burnt hardware. But her movements had softened, not slower, not less disciplined, but no longer braced for the worst, as though something in her had dared to believe she wouldn't be turned away tomorrow. And Shaw, he noticed. He noticed when she passed him tools without hesitation, when she left her boots near the cot instead of by the door, when Elu toddled across the workshop on wobbling feet and Kalen didn't snatch her back, but watched as the girl reached for his coat with small, curious fingers. He didn't stop her. She would sit by his feet some evenings, stacking washers and discarded sensor rings into awkward towers, humming softly, barely audible, yet almost in tune with the buzzing bench equipment. And then one morning as he adjusted a cracked retinal encoder, Kalen appeared beside him. Her hands were empty, her eyes steady. I'm ready, she said. He didn't ask for what. He didn't need to. She was holding the chip shell he'd offered her days ago. He studied her expression for a beat, not a flicker of fear, only the quiet weight of decision. Sit, he said, motioning her toward the bench terminal. She did. He initialized the blank registry and began entering the data. Name, approximate origin, parental anchor chain. No forgeries this time, no shortcuts. This one mattered. As the screen pulsed with each confirmation, Kalen spoke softly, barely above the hum of the terminal. Let her name be hers. He paused, looked up. Elu? He asked. She nodded. Not a designation, not a number, just that. Shaw entered the request. No system birth record, but the bond chain traced directly to Kalen Veris, a name the system hadn't seen in 3 years. He hesitated, then added one more line. Parental guardian. Primary. Active. When the imprint process completed, 2 cards emerged from the slot. One for Kalen, one for Elu. Kalen picked them up slowly, as if afraid they might burn her fingers. They feel real, she whispered. They are, Shaw said. She stared at them, unmoving. We exist now. He nodded. But the moment didn't last. That evening, while Shaw worked to boost the signal clarity on a jury-rigged scanner, Kalen stood by the door, still in alert. They're getting closer, she said. Shaw set his tools down. How do you know? I went out, just for air, 2 levels up, no lights, no insignias. They moved like ghosts, quiet, fast. Wiped a food stall in 30 seconds. C-type sweepers, he muttered. Ghost patrols, they map first, then erase. Kalen's voice lowered. They're not just looking for undocumented bodies. They're looking for someone specific. He turned to face her fully. You? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer to Elu, who was sitting near the heating coil, drawing shapes in dust with a bolt head. I think it's her, Kalen said. Shaw's stomach tightened. She's not just undocumented, Kalen went on. She's unclassified. They flagged her neural sync once, labeled her as aberrant. I didn't understand what it meant then. Now I do. He stood still, listening. They couldn't control her profile, couldn't fit her into the prediction grids. So they marked her. And now they want her back, Shaw said. Kalen nodded. Not to register her, to remove the variable. Silence dropped between them. Then Shaw crossed the room, pulled open a drawer under the main console. 3 blank data shells sat inside. He grabbed them, inserted the first, and began deleting. Not just her record, all of them. Every name, every ID thread he'd ever saved. Every forged birth certificate, relocation string, guardian bond, the lives of dozens of others who had come before her. Shaw, I know what I'm doing, he said. But you could disappear with us. He didn't look up. I already disappeared. This is just clearing the wreckage. The final thread burned out. The console flickered, then shut itself down. She stood in silence as he pulled a duffel from beneath the floorboard, tossing in what little they could carry: rations, wraps, heat cells, and the child's mask. Kalen stepped forward. I won't let you do this alone. He looked up. I'm not asking you to. Number, you're expecting me to run. He didn't respond. She stepped closer. But I'm not going anywhere unless you're with us. There was a pause, then a nod. Behind them, Elu stood with her blanket trailing behind her. She looked at Shaw, then at Kalen, then patted over, placing a rusted gear into Shaw's palm. He stared down at it. Tao, she whispered. The word struck something deep in him, older than memory. It wasn't just mispronunciation anymore, it was a naming, a choice. Kalen noticed. She doesn't call anyone that but you. It's just her way of saying, no, Kalen said softly. It's what she calls the safe one. He looked at her, and for once, let her see the vulnerability in his face. And then, without another word, they moved, packed fast, left the workshop dark and bare, a memory sealed in dust. By the time the sweepers arrived, silent, lethal, methodical, they found nothing but old copper wiring and a child's drawing in the grime. 3 stick figures under a circle of stars. The freight lift descended with the groaning weight of history behind it. Kalen stood close to the wall, her arm wrapped protectively around Elu, who was tucked tightly against her chest beneath the thermal wrap. The child's small hand was curled around the edge of Kalen's jacket. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes were open, luminous in the dark, but she didn't make a sound. Shaw stood near the lift's manual controls, one hand on the emergency override lever. His other hand rested lightly on the grip of the weapon strapped to his hip. He wasn't tense, but focused, locked in the kind of stillness that only came from long years of knowing what came next. They said nothing for several floors. The shaft groaned and juddered around them, old gears grinding through decades of dust and rust. The lights above them faded one by one, until only the faintest flicker of blue emergency strip lights remained. Kalen finally spoke. How much deeper? 2 levels. Then it opens into the access well, Shaw said. No cameras, no trackers. They stripped this whole sector for scrap years ago. Why did you choose this place? He glanced at her. Because it was already forgotten. The lift slowed. A sharp clunk rang out as it locked into place. Shaw pulled the lever. The gate creaked open. A gust of stale air rushed in, damp, metallic, with a bite of ozone. The corridor beyond was long and narrow, ribbed with rusted pipe and lined with collapsed bulkheads. Emergency lights flickered in the distance like old stars ready to burn out. This way, Shaw said, stepping out first. Kalen followed, shifting Elu's weight on her hip. Her boots scuffed softly on the concrete floor, damp with condensation. The air was cold but not biting, survivable. Elu stirred slightly. Her hand reached up to rest against her mother's neck, her eyes heavy-lidded. She didn't cry. She hadn't since they left the workshop. Kalen kissed the top of her head. She's too quiet. She's watching, Shaw said. She always watches. They moved deeper into the corridor. The walls widened. opening into a chamber strewn with broken crates and old tool panels, a few overturned chairs, a collapsed scaffold. Shaw gestured toward a half-buried door in the far wall. That's it, a supply station, one of the early emergency shelters before they rerouted biosupport above. Kaylin hesitated. What if someone's already taken it? They'd be dead. She raised an eyebrow. There's no airflow in there, no light, nothing but what you bring in. I rigged it to stay sealed unless you know where to knock. He stepped to the door and tapped twice, pause, then once more. There was a mechanical groan, then a soft release of pressure. The door slid open an inch. He pushed it the rest of the way and stepped inside. The room beyond was pitch black at first. Then Shaw struck a charge rod against the wall, activating the power coils. A low hum followed, and a single dome light flickered to life overhead, illuminating a small room with 2 cots, a shelf of ancient rations, and a water tank that had survived years of neglect by sheer miracle. Kaylin entered, exhaling. You weren't lying. I only lie when I'm out of options. She laid Elu gently on the far cot. The child curled on her side, silent, her little chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Kaylin sat beside her for a moment, watching. Then she turned to Shaw. They'll still be tracking. I know, he said, rummaging through a storage bin. He pulled out a heat pad and a breather patch. We'll stay here one night, enough to let her rest. Then we move again, East Sector. I've got an old contact who owes me. He keeps a transport under the foundry floor. Kaylin looked around. You planned all this. I planned to die down here, Shaw said. Then you knocked on my door. Her gaze didn't leave him. And now? He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. Now I'm rewriting the plan. They were quiet for a long time. Then Kaylin asked, why didn't you run? He didn't answer at first. There was a girl, human, about Elu's age. Came through the registry back when I still had a uniform. Her father forged a relocation ID. Sloppy work. It flagged on my screen. My orders were clear. Reject, flag, detain. He rubbed the back of his neck, jaw clenched. I hesitated. A colleague overrode me. They sent them back to the mines. I never saw them again. Kaylin stared at him. I thought if I followed the rules, I could fix things from the inside. But the system isn't broken. It's functioning exactly as intended. And now you forge names, she said. No, he replied. Now I give them back. Kaylin's throat tightened. She looked down at the chip still tucked in her coat. Her name, reborn, not assigned, chosen. Elu called you something before, she said. Tao. Kaylin nodded. She thinks that's your name. Shaw smiled faintly. It's hers for me. It means something to her, Kaylin whispered. Something simple, something safe. Shaw said nothing, just leaned back against the cold metal wall and closed his eyes for a moment. She's not the only one who needed someone safe, Kaylin added. That silence stretched again, but this time it was warm. Then a sound outside, distant, a metal scrape, followed by stillness. Kaylin stiffened. Shaw was already on his feet. She's asleep, Kaylin whispered. Shaw nodded and moved toward the door, pistol in hand. He opened the panel slightly, just enough to peer into the corridor. Nothing, yet. He stepped back and looked at Kaylin. They're close. She moved to Elu, covering her in a second layer of cloth. The child didn't stir. Kaylin straightened. If we have to run, we won't, Shaw said. But if we do, you carry her. I'll draw them off. She stepped forward. I told you I'm not running without you. He looked at her, and this time he nodded. A beat passed, then a faint rustle from outside the shelter, boots scuffing damp concrete, maybe 10 meters away. Kaylin reached for Shaw's hand, and for the first time since she'd entered his world, he didn't flinch. He held it, not to reassure her, but because she wasn't letting go. Together, they waited, no longer prey, no longer alone. Whatever came through that door next, they would face it side by side. Not fugitives, but something stronger. A family, chosen, bound by trust, not blood, and unerasable. Dawn never reached the depths of Chrysium's undergrid. There was no sky down here, no sunrises, only the gradual shift in temperature and the soft change in air pressure when the city above began to stir. But for Shaw, Kaylin, and Elu that morning was something else entirely. It was survival. It was choice. It was the first time they had ever woken into a day they had claimed. Shaw cracked open the shelter hatch just enough to check the corridor. The air outside was still, but not dead, a silence filled with potential danger. but no immediate threat. "They're gone," he said quietly. Kaylin nodded from where she sat with Elu on her lap, brushing strands of white hair away from the girl's sleepy eyes. Elu blinked up at Shaw with the soft, watchful gaze she had carried since the beginning. Kaylin leaned down and kissed her temple. "She didn't cry," she murmured. "She didn't need to," Shaw replied. He stepped back inside and let the door close behind him with a gentle hiss. They packed in silence. Efficient now. Practiced. Kaylin folded the few remaining heat wraps into a side sling, while Shaw secured the ration pouches and slipped a spare chip reader into his belt. Elu clung to Kaylin's back, wrapped in a carrier Shaw had adjusted to her size the night before. "You remember the route?" he asked Kaylin. "East Corridor, cut through the refinery chute. We avoid the upper ducts, use the lift base, not the rail system." "Exactly." She met his eyes. "Do you think your contact will help us?" Shaw paused. "He owes me more than a favor. I once rewrote his family into existence." Kaylin gave the smallest smile. "Then let's go." They exited quietly, navigating through broken piping and twisted support beams. The world around them seemed older than it had yesterday. Like every bolt, every shadow remembered what had happened and had chosen to remain silent about it. As they reached the junction, Kaylin spoke without looking back. "Shaw? Yeah. You still haven't told me your full name." He hesitated. "I don't think it matters anymore. It matters to me." He exhaled and slowed his pace until they walked side by side. "My name was Shaw Devrin, but it's been dead a long time." She looked over at him. "Then take it back." He shook his head. "It was erased for a reason. And yet you're still here." They stopped at the next corner, hidden beneath a fractured support column. Above them, a soft rumble rolled through the piping. Another patrol moving overhead, too high to spot them. But it was a reminder. They weren't out yet. Shaw turned to Kaylin. "I'm not the same man I was when they stripped that name from me. That man followed rules, watched others suffer, lost his family to a system he helped build." Kaylin stepped closer. "And this man?" she asked. He looked at Elu, resting against her mother's back, her eyes fluttering closed in the dim light. "This man stayed." Kaylin reached into her coat and pulled out the ID chip he had given her, the one that read Kaylin Veris. She pressed it gently into his palm. "She's not the only one who needs a name," she said. He looked down at the card, then up at her. "You're saying I should forge one?" "I'm saying," Kaylin whispered, "you've earned one." He turned the chip over in his hand, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. They moved again. It took hours to reach the outer ring of the Foundry District. They stayed low, moved only between shadows. The city throbbed above them, oblivious to the small rebellion occurring beneath its feet. When they arrived at the foundry floor, Shaw led them to a hidden panel beneath the grating. He pried it open, revealing a tunnel lined with scorched lift rails and dormant cargo drones. At the far end was an old utility sled, long out of commission. But Shaw knew it still worked. He'd kept the fuel cells hidden under a sealed grate, and no one else knew where. He moved fast, refueling and checking the guidance system, while Kaylin held Elu close and adjusted the sling. Shaw turned to them. "This is it. Where does it lead?" "Out," he said. "Past the outer city sectors, into the marsh corridors. There's a safe place, small settlement, no scans, no chains." Kaylin didn't ask if it was real. She trusted him now. He helped her onto the sled, then climbed in beside her. Elu settled between them, still silent but warm. As they pulled away from the city's rusting bones, Shaw glanced back once, not in fear, just to mark the place where it had all changed. They rode for hours, no words, just hums of old tech and the sound of the future rolling gently beneath them. When they arrived, it was dusk. The sky was visible here, ashen gray streaked with pink. For the first time, Elu looked up and reached for it. Kaylin smiled. Shaw lifted the girl onto his shoulders. "Tau," she said, gripping his hair softly. Kaylin laughed, not with amusement, but with something older, gentler, relief. "She doesn't say it for anyone else," she said. "She made it up," Shaw said, adjusting her weight. "It doesn't even mean anything." "To her," Kaylin said, watching them both, "it means home." Weeks later, in a small outpost miles from the city, a woman signed a food registry using her real name. The clerk didn't blink. A child ran past her, blue-skinned, white-haired, chasing a broken drone toy down a dirt path. A man leaned against the fence, watching them, eyes softer than the ones he once carried in the dark. "Name?" a traveler asked, passing through. Kaylin looked over at Shaw. She smiled. "Shaw Devon," she said. "He gave my daughter a name and gave me back my voice." Then she added as Elu laughed in the distance, "And I gave him a reason to live." And that was enough. The air smelled of morning rain, not acid wash runoff or corroded coolant mist, real rain. Clean, soft, earthy, the kind that kissed the wild grass instead of melting it. Somewhere beyond the settlement walls, water dripped from broadleaf trees into the marshy soil, and the sound reached them like a lullaby riding the breeze. Shaw stood outside the small home they'd built into the slope, half salvaged from old transport hulls, half assembled with their own hands. The structure still creaked in the wind, and the solar array on the roof blinked uncertainly in overcast light. But it was theirs. It didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to hold the three of them. He was sanding a plank of scrap wood, smoothing it into the side of what would soon be Elu's first bed. She'd long since outgrown the makeshift cot they'd dragged from the shelter. These days she insisted on climbing down from her mother's sling on her own, toddling around with arms too small for her ambitions and eyes too large for her tiny face. Shaw glanced up and saw her now, barefoot in the wet grass, chasing a blue-winged beetle with determined, tiptoeing steps. Her soft, pale blue skin shimmered faintly in the early light, and her hair, thin, white, and finally long enough to gather into a little tie, bobbed behind her. Kaylin sat nearby under the shade awning, stitching patches into Elu's worn tunic with gentle, practiced hands. Her sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, her long hair pulled back into a braid. She wasn't singing, but she hummed low, the same tune she always returned to when she worked. A Silvani lullaby. One Elu had begun to hum back in her sleep. Shaw exhaled quietly and turned back to the wood. It was a good morning. No need for watches, no threat of scanners, no coded knock at the door, no running, just wind, the girl, her mother, and a world where his hands could finally build instead of erase. "Tau!" He looked up again. Elu was sprinting toward him now, arms stretched out, bare feet slapping the ground, cheeks flushed with effort. She tripped once, caught herself, then reached him, grabbing the hem of his shirt like a lifeline. Shaw crouched instantly. "Hey, what is it?" She was panting, eyes wide and sparkling. She held something in her hand, a snapped-off beetle wing, translucent and violet. "For you," she said, proud and breathless. He smiled, gently accepting it. "Thank you, little storm." She giggled at the nickname. Behind them, Kaylin chuckled under her breath. That beetle never stood a chance. Shaw stood, lifting Elu into his arms. She didn't resist. She curled against his chest like she always did, like that space belonged to her and no one else. Her tiny hand came to rest over his heart, fingers splayed wide. "Good catch," he said, still holding the wing between his thumb and forefinger. Elu tilted her head. "I'm brave." "Yes, you are." A beat of silence. Then, with no warning, no hesitation, no warning at all, she looked up and whispered, "Dad." Shaw froze. The word wasn't mispronounced. Not like Tao, not like before. It was clear, directer, soft but certain, like she'd been carrying it around for weeks, turning it over in her mind until the time felt right. His breath caught. Kaylin looked up from her stitching. Her eyes met his. Elu didn't seem to notice the stillness she'd dropped like a stone into the water. She just nestled closer, her voice muffled against his chest. "Dad, hold me more?" Shaw blinked hard once, then swallowed. His voice cracked when he said, "Yeah, of course." He sat down on the half-finished bed frame, Elu still clinging to him, and held her close. Not like something delicate, not like something broken, but like something real. Kaylin rose quietly and walked over, kneeling beside them. She brushed a stray lock of hair from Elu's forehead, then leaned in to rest her head lightly on Shaw's shoulder. None of them spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. Outside, the beetles returned to the grasses. The clouds parted just enough for sunlight to filter through, bathing the hillside in pale gold. A child breathed slow and steady in her father's arms. A woman leaned against the man who chose to stay, and a man who once erased names for survival now carried one that had been given, not by code or signature, but by a little voice, one that called him Dad and meant it.